This 1962 300 small D is going to be for sale, and I'm hoping to interest someone by making this small video. And first of all, the car, of course, is, as you can see, pillarless. That is to say, all the windows come down, and in the rear, that small quarter window gets taken out. It has a lovely little mechanism right here that locks the window in. And so what I'm going to do is bring it in, look around the corner, pull on the knob, and then push it up, and the window is in. And it's quite sturdy. There is a special pocket that the factory supplies. I've got it in the trunk here. And both windows fit in here. There's a wool liner in between them, and it's a nice way to keep the windows if you're going for an afternoon drive and want them out and out of the way. Oh, since we've got the trunk, it's quite capacious, and it holds much more than one might think. The car is essentially quite strong, quite straight. Somehow it has managed to survive the ravages of aging. Being 62, that's almost 65 years old, and it's a tribute to the material on the interior, which is a wool velour, and it is mighty enduring. As you can see, the interior looks really quite good. The car is indicating on the odometer that it has 63,000 kilometers. It's a European car, or was a European car. And it's not likely, frankly, with that much age, that this car would have so few miles on it. Let's see, that would be 3,600 miles. I'm sorry, 30,600 miles were it in miles. And I think the reality is more likely that it will have another 100,000 kilometers on it, called 163,000 kilometers, which would be about 100,000 miles, which seems realistic. A great deal of this car, most of it, I'd say 98%, is original, including the wood and the interior, and pretty much all the other aspects, obviously not the tires. It does have a stainless steel exhaust system, which is a plus point for durability. And the other thing I can tell you is that the rubber is actually all around the car in pretty nice shape. I would submit as an evidence of that this little pivot right here on the on this quarter window, this little piece of rubber on the inside and on the outside. Looks like a contiguous piece, but that little arch is actually a separate piece. Mostly these are gone. The sun has taken its toll. The rubber has become brittle, but it's still in good shape here. So I presume, without knowing, that this car probably had garaging most of its life. Most of these cars did, and that would explain why it is essentially in pretty decent shape and detail. Ultraviolet light hasn't chewed on it, and the other thing is then the paint. I think the paint looks nice. It is certainly not a show car, even so it's unusual and spectacular, and it might win a local contest because it's unusual and looks nice. I presume that this car was probably painted in the 60s, I would imagine. It's I would say, a top-notch street car paint job. Slightly better than most new cars. But overall, if this car had a perfect paint job, suitable for show, then the temptation would be not to drive it, because there'd be so much value in the paint alone that you wouldn't take that risk. So the idea here then is that this car is meant to be driven. It's a driver. It's a nice driver. And the other thing in terms of a driver is that everything is manual on this automobile. Manual steering, a manual 4-speed shift on the column, which I'll show you a little later, and also the central lubrication system that most of these vehicles have has been eliminated. So they're just grease zerks like a normal car. So every oil change, it's probably a good idea to grease the chassis. There are 27 points to lubricate on the car, so it's a fair amount. But these cars, having been built to be a lifetime, that would come to good stead to keep it for a lifetime for someone. Not only did the cloth of the seat hold up rather well, which, by the way, it's worthwhile mentioning that these seats being cloth covered, the fundament underneath the cloth, if you will, the stuffing, is actually constituted by coil springs in this part and in that part. And so that gives more support to the outside skin, and because it being cloth, did it not have such significant support, the cloth would deteriorate rapidly. Which brings us to the carpet. The carpet is also in nice shape. I have these commercially available covers, and however, there's something pleasant about the entire darkness of the carpet, which is in lovely condition. So having these covers does give the car interior a bit of a greater visual dimension. It's a pleasure to see the contrast between the light and the dark. And also in terms of the appointments, each door has this lovely, rather large map pocket. It's really quite capacious and beautifully done with spring-loaded pivots and carpets, and fully lined in wool as well. Obviously, being a manual shift and a manual transmission, manual power steering, lack of power steering, the windows are all manual, and the door opening and locking is manual as well. So the car really has been built, I would say, to survive for a long time with a modest amount of care. And I think this car is a fairly good example of the survivability of these kinds of vehicles. So let's go over to the instrumentation. So the shifting is a 4-speed on the column. So you have first gear, second gear, neutral, which has a throw, third gear, and fourth gear. And then in neutral, reverse is neutral and up. Instrumentation, even so stylistically indulgent, sort of an art deco theme with French curves. Nevertheless, the important information is the oil pressure, which, by the way, this engine has superb oil pressure. Anytime you're driving, the number 3 represents atmospheres, so that would be 45 pounds. And even at hot idle, it tends to be at 2 at 30 pounds. And Mercedes points out that a hot idle minimum is 1/2 of 1 atmosphere, or 7 pounds. So that's the oil pressure gauge. The water temperature, of course, in metric, 40, 80, and 100, 120. And it normally rides at about 80, just slightly to the left of 80. And then this little window right here is the blinker. Of course, left and right, but it does not have a specific left and right light, just a blinker light that for each of them, left or right. And then over on this side we have the fuel tank, and which holds 20 gallons, and the M meter, which is really a wonderful gauge. And usually after you start, the M gauge will show plus because it's charging to make up the electricity of the starting procedure. And then as you drive, it drifts over to neutral when the charging is not essential anymore. On the heating and cooling, which is this quadrant, you have airflow. There's a blue dot here to indicate that the air is flowing through the outside to the inside. And on this end of the slider, there is a red dot like this one, which indicates heat. And you have 4 levers because in Mercedes Infinite Wisdom they give you control for heat and cooling and airflow, both for the right side and for the left side. The cigarette lighter, which brings us to these lovely ashtrays. In the 50s and 60s in Europe, everyone smoked. So there are 4 ashtrays, 1 for each person. Okay, the glove box also lined, and all this wood is actually not just veneered, it's actually solid chunks of wood. So, owner's manual, and here is a copy of the factory supplied parts identification booklet with these wonderful graphics which show the relationship and the parts, every part, and each one has a number. So if you need to communicate with your provider of parts as you need them, you can refer to this book, the page and the number, and the identification will be complete. There are, fortunately, 3 sets of keys. This is one set, and there's another ignition key, and then there are 2 more complete sets of keys. And the best part is they're all factory keys instead of copies. And also, there is an antenna lead here, and I think the reason that this plate right here, which ought to have the radio, someone decided to put the radio in the glove box. There are a couple of holes, and I think that had to do with bringing power to the radio. Okay, beyond that, I think it might be interesting to know that this is the fan for the heating system, 2 speeds, starting button, and this light right here, I'm not sure whether the camera will show it, but the light is on, called the charging light, and as the engine starts, then the charging light goes out, and will normally, it is supposed to stay out, that is to say, as long as the generator is charging. All right, so people ask, when do I shift? Well, your personal sense of comfort, how fast the engine is running, certainly is very important. However, on the speedometer there are red marks. There's 1 hash, 2 hash marks in red, and 3 hash marks, and then a final. And that indicates desperately get out of first gear, get out of second gear, get out of third gear, and then do not exceed 100 miles per hour. And that aids to let the driver know when it is absolutely necessary to shift in order not to over-rev the engine. And normally when I drive this car, I don't even go that far on the RPM. It doesn't make any sense. That leaves us to the steering wheel, standard Mercedes large steering wheel. It still is the original steering wheel and horn ring, which is sort of rare because most people crack them and damage them. So that's nice. And here's your blinker control, left and right. And that sort of sums up. Oh, let's not forget the parking brake. Makes this wonderful noise when it's engaged. And the parking brake on these cars is, in fact, the actual brake in the back that's manually applied, and it is extremely effective. So that's a nice thing. I always use this parking brake whenever I stop the car, just as a good habit. Then you have one additional knob here, and what that really has to do with is to pull it out, and it allows or enlarges the amount of fresh air that comes in. There's one on the passenger side as well as on the driver's side. So that's the main of the features inside, and I suppose we'll go to the engine bay. The engine release is right here, and you simply pull, and there are two latches in the hood, safeties. Under the chrome, and first, and there's a latch here and another latch exactly at the same spot over here, and you can see them right here, and when you pull them back then they unlock from these holes right here, and you can raise the hood. This is as far as the hood goes. So there's nothing special beyond the fact that this 6-cylinder overhead cam engine is fuel injected, and it is what's known as port injection. So the injection nozzles fire right in front of the intake valves, and which makes for a somewhat more efficient engine and a better sense of response from the throttle. Of course, the heater cores are right there. They seem to work rather well. And the other thing that's interesting or useful on these engines is one fan belt only. I think Mercedes thought it's best to keep a fan belt to a minimum, one belt to worry about. This is the air controller. The fuel injection is actually controlled by the vacuum of the engine. There is an accelerator pedal and accelerator linkage. However, that does no more than open the air throttle, which changes the vacuum in the engine, and the fuel injection responds to that by giving more fuel. Voltage regulator, the generator seems to be doing a good job, so there are no problems with maintaining electricity. And beyond that, it is sort of late 1950s, early 1960s sophisticated engine. Everything seems to work well at this point. It's an air silencer, and the air filter lives inside of that, which is accessible by these 3 clips to flip up this piece and put in your air filter. It has a new air filter in it now. So those are I believe, the salient aspects of the engine bay. Of course, radiator cap. It has the radiator fluid has just been changed. The brake fluid was changed earlier this year. The oil was also changed earlier this year. I think I've only driven this car maybe 500-600 miles this year, so not a great deal. I try to exercise it in order to keep the tires round and all the fluids moving in the car. We're going to take it for a little drive to let you sense about what this is about. First gear, and we're off. The brakes are very nice on this car. They're extremely large drum brakes. The width of the brake shoe is actually about 4 inches. The fuel injection makes the engine very flexible. Here we are going 20-25 miles per hour in fourth gear, and I can just give gas at this speed and it simply pulls away. Got nice inline stability. Doesn't try to pull one way or the other. Right now we're going 80 kilometers per hour, which would translate into about 50 miles, 48 miles per hour. I'm sorry, 100 kilometers per hour would represent 60 miles, or 62 miles per hour. Particularly powerful engine. It has about 195 to 200 horsepower, but the car is rather heavy, and so it's not a slug. However, it certainly will not win at the stoplight acceleration derbies. Which brings to mind the other point about these cars. And that is, this particular model, or that variety of this car, were really meant to be town cars. I think that this particular vehicle, being standard shift, no power steering, is likely to have been a corporate automobile with customers to the factory or to the airport or whatever transportation necessity there was. But I doubt that this was initially an automobile designed for the private owner-driver. We're going to turn around here. I think that the only time that the lack of power steering enters into consideration while driving is parallel parking. The steering is not particularly heavy, however, it's by Armstrong and it takes some effort. Right, we're going to return and let's go another way. Is very comfortable. The fact that the car is essentially a frame and body on top of it gives a tremendous insulation from road undulations and other upsets of the pavement. Hardly any of those sensations seem to interrupt the pleasure of the drive. But the car is sprung relatively firmly. Fuel consumption is not particularly fantastic by today's standards. On the road in this countryside, it'll get 18 miles per gallon in that neighborhood. If you were on a trip where you could maintain 55 to 60 miles per hour, you might, if it's a flat surface all the way, you might be able to get 20 miles per gallon. But it is particularly alarming in town. I would say general city traffic, the gas mileage is probably down to 15, 16. Probably spinning at this point at about 3,400 RPM, mainly because the differential is very high numbered in order to overcome the inertia to get the car going. Steering is rather precise. I think might be possible to thread the needle if necessary on a narrow bridge or some other smaller roads. The other thing that I really like about this car and this ilk of automobiles is that the rolling is awfully good. I've got it neutral, and we're just going to let it coast about 25 miles per hour. About 20 miles per hour now. And you have very little resistance to rolling. Put it back into fourth. And continue down the road at 20. Also, there are no interior noises, no shaking, no rattles, or outside noises that might imply deficiencies. As the car's rolling a little bit, second gear will easily start up. Once again in neutral. Still in neutral. As you can imagine, the turning circle is not exactly spectacular because the car is large. And that's the drive.